Stepfather kicked me out while my mom was away caring for her sick sister, thinking he had power over the house, then completely fell apart when mom came home and revealed he had been living off her money the entire marriage. When my mom told me she'd be out of town for a week, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time she had to travel on short notice. This time it was to visit her sister who'd been hospitalized. She made sure the fridge was stocked and even left a little extra cash for takeout if I didn't feel like cooking. Before she left, she hugged me tight and said she'd be back before I knew it. I didn't expect her husband, my stepfather, Gregory, to be warm or fatherly in her absence, but I figured we could ignore each other for a few days and stay out of each other's way. That was usually our unspoken agreement anyway. Gregory had never hidden the fact that I wasn't his priority. He'd always acted like I was some lingering responsibility he was forced to tolerate. The guy had been married to my mom for 6 years by then, but he treated me like a temporary guest in my own home. Not cruel, just cold. Dismissive. Like I was using resources he believed belonged to him. I was only 3 days into my mom's absence when things escalated. I came home after a long shift at the bookstore where I worked weekends and found my laundry basket dumped in the hallway, and my bedsheets missing. At first, I thought maybe the dryer had eaten them, note the sarcasm, or he'd accidentally knocked things over while looking for something. But when I stepped into my room, I realized it wasn't an accident. My stuff was being packed up. Gregory was sitting on the couch, watching a football game with a drink in hand, acting like it was just another Sunday. When I asked him what was going on, he looked at me like I'd just asked the stupidest question on earth. Said he figured I'd understand by now that I was an adult and that it was time I started acting like one. That he wasn't running a charity and that I had no reason to be freeloading anymore. I told him my mom would be back in 4 days. That this was my home, too. He shrugged and said that I was legally an adult now and he didn't have to let me stay under his roof. That it was his house and his rules. His house. Those 2 words made something inside me burn. This wasn't just his house. My mom had bought it after her divorce from my dad, years before Gregory even came into the picture. But he stood there like he owned the walls, the floor, and every right to decide who lived inside them. When I tried to call my mom, he blocked me, saying she was handling family and didn't need to be bothered with my drama. I grabbed what I could, some clothes, my charger, my shoes, and left. It was around 8 p.m., and I had nowhere to go. I didn't want to tell anyone right away. A part of me was embarrassed. Like I'd done something wrong. It was ridiculous, I know. But when someone kicks you out like you're trash, you start second-guessing yourself. I called my friend Abby, and without asking for details, she told me to come over. Her parents weren't thrilled to have an unexpected guest, but they let me crash on their pull-out sofa in the basement. I promised it would only be for a few days. The next few nights were the longest I'd ever known. Abby tried to keep my spirits up, brought me snacks, invited me to watch movies, but every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing Gregory's voice, "You're not a kid anymore. Time to stop being a burden." On day 5, I woke up to a notification from mom. A simple, "Hey, sweetie. Landing tonight. Can't wait to see you." I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I hadn't told her a thing while she was away. I figured I could handle it. And honestly, I didn't want to be the reason she rushed back or got distracted while dealing with her sister, my aunt's health. But that night, after dinner at Abby's, I gathered the courage to text her. I said there was something I needed to talk to her about when she got home, something important. She sent back a thumbs up and a heart. When I walked through the doors of my actual home the next morning, mom was standing in the kitchen. The moment she saw me dragging in a trash bag of my clothes, she looked confused, and then she froze. I said one sentence. She didn't even wait for me to explain. She called out Gregory's name once. Loud. He came in from the den, his usual morning coffee in hand, acting like everything was normal. Said something like, "Oh, so the runaway's back, huh?" I swear, I've never seen my mom's face fall like that. I didn't have to say a word. She turned to him, asked if what she was hearing was true, that he kicked me out while she was gone. He smirked and said he was just teaching me a lesson in independence. That I needed to grow up sometime. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just looked at him like he was a complete stranger. Then she turned back to me and told me to go upstairs and rest. She'd take care of everything. And I believed her. But I could tell, even then, something inside her had snapped. I stayed upstairs like mom told me, but it was hard not to listen in. Even with the door mostly shut, the house wasn't big, and the tension practically echoed off the walls. She didn't scream the way I imagined she would. Her voice was calm, low, and direct. Which somehow made it worse. I could tell Gregory wasn't expecting that. He kept trying to cut in, make excuses, twist words like he always did, but she wasn't having it. She asked him why he thought it was okay to throw her daughter out while she was away. He said I was 18 and needed to learn how the real world worked. That he wasn't running some kind of charity. That word again. Charity. I heard a long pause. And then I heard her say something I'll never forget. No, Gregory. You're not running a charity. You're receiving one. Silence. Complete silence for a good 10 seconds. I didn't even hear him breathing. Then came the nervous chuckle from him, followed by a very fake sounding, "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't raise her voice. Just laid it out plain. She reminded him of a few facts he seemed to conveniently forget. He moved into this house after losing his job, and she let him do that rent-free. She paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and even covered the payments on the car he drove every day. He hadn't contributed more than a few $100s here and there over the last 2 years while working part-time jobs he constantly quit. He hadn't even bought her a birthday gift in the past 3 years without using her own credit card. She asked him, point blank, what exactly he thought he was offering that gave him the right to evict her daughter while she was out of town. Gregory tried to fight back, claimed he cooked, that he did handyman stuff around the house, and that he was the man of the house. But the more he talked, the weaker it all sounded. She said being the man of the house didn't mean pushing her child onto the street like she was some problem to be dealt with. Especially when the person doing the pushing was living off her money the whole time. I didn't even realize I was crying until I looked down and saw the front of my shirt damp. And for the record, I cooked. This wasn't just about being kicked out. This was years of watching this man slowly chip away at her confidence. Years of him making subtle digs about her age, about how she lucked out finding someone like him, about how clingy I was. I guess I never really knew if she saw it. But now, it was clear she did. She told him to leave. Just like that. He laughed at first. Thought she was bluffing. But when he saw she wasn't, he started switching tactics. First came the guilt trip. How could she do this after everything they'd been through? Didn't she remember their wedding vows? Then came the anger, saying she was just a bitter woman who let her bratty daughter run the house. And when none of that worked, he went quiet. I heard the front door slam not long after. Later that afternoon, Mom came up to my room with a cup of tea and sat beside me. She didn't say much, just rubbed my back for a minute and told me everything was okay now. That I wasn't going anywhere again, not unless I wanted to. When I asked her why she hadn't said anything all these years, she just sighed. Said that sometimes you want something to work so badly that you ignore the cracks. And sometimes, you think keeping the peace is the best way to hold your home together. But when he crossed the line and hurt me, she realized something important. There's no peace in a house where your child doesn't feel safe. Then she told me that Gregory didn't just get kicked out. He got cut off. Completely. My jaw dropped. Apparently, the whole time they were married, she'd been careful. The house was still in her name. She never added him to her will. Every joint account had a cap, and she kept the big savings account in her maiden name. Gregory had thought he was entitled to everything. But legally, financially, he had nothing. She told me she'd spoken to her lawyer that morning to make sure it stayed that way. I was stunned. Not just because of how thorough she'd been, but because I never realized how much she'd been protecting herself and me behind the scenes. For a long time, I used to wonder if she saw how he treated me. If maybe she'd chosen to look the other way. But now, I realized she was just picking her battles. And this time, she'd picked mine. That night, I slept in my own bed again. With fresh sheets. I didn't go to bed tense. But the story wasn't quite over yet. 2 days later, Gregory showed back up. I came home from the grocery store to see his car, actually my mom's car that he drives in the driveway. My heart immediately dropped. But Mom wasn't panicking. She was sitting calmly on the front porch, sipping her iced tea like it was any other Tuesday. Gregory stood a few feet away, clearly angry, but there was something different this time. Desperation. He was saying something about how this was all a misunderstanding. That he was willing to work through things if she'd just listen. That he didn't mean to make me feel unwanted. That he thought she'd understand what he was trying to do. She didn't say a word. Just handed him a white envelope. I didn't even need to ask. I knew what it was. Inside was a copy of the lawyer's letter, formal divorce paperwork. No backtracking, no warnings. Gregory looked at the paper, then at her. Asked if she was really going to throw away 6 years over a silly argument. She didn't flinch. Said it wasn't about the argument. It was about character. And he had shown his loud and clear. Update 1, the days that followed felt almost surreal. It was like our house had been wrapped in a silence that was finally peaceful. Not tense. Not suffocating. Just quiet in the way a home should be. Gregory hadn't come back since the day Mom handed him the divorce paperwork. She muted his number. Moved all her passwords and finances back to single user access. She even asked me to help her set up a new PIN for her debit card, something he used to know without ever asking. I could see her slowly breathe again. It wasn't easy for her. 6 years is a long time to live with someone, even if they weren't all good years. But she was getting stronger by the day. Then came the messages. Not to her, he couldn't get through. He started texting me. At first, it was smug stuff. He said he hoped I was proud of myself for ruining a marriage and breaking apart a family. He acted like I was the problem. That I must have manipulated my mom into turning on him. I didn't respond. Then his tone shifted. He said he forgave me. That I was just a kid. That he knew I didn't understand grown-up stuff and that my mom had always been emotionally unstable anyway. I still didn't respond. And finally, he begged. He said he had nowhere to go. That he'd been crashing with a friend, but it wasn't working out. That he missed the house, the routine, the meals, even the little moments. He called me kiddo in one of those texts. Like he used to when things were normal in the very beginning. But there was no warmth behind it anymore. Just cold calculation. I showed Mom. She just sighed and told me I didn't have to carry any of it. She said Gregory had made his choices. And just because he was regretting them now didn't mean we had to carry the fallout. Still, I could tell it wore on her. The idea that she once loved this man enough to believe he'd be a real partner, a father figure even. That weekend, we went to the farmer's market together, something we hadn't done in years. She laughed while trying samples. I picked out weird jams just to see her face scrunch up, and for once, we didn't talk about Gregory. It felt like starting fresh. Until Monday morning. Gregory showed up at her work. He stood outside the building like some lost puppy. At first, her coworkers thought he was there to surprise her or something. But she was horrified. She walked past him without stopping. He followed her. She had to tell him in front of everyone that he needed to leave. That their relationship was over, and his behavior was completely inappropriate. Security had to get involved. That night, we talked again. She told me something that finally put everything into perspective. Something that explained why she'd held on so long. It wasn't just love. It was guilt. Back when she met Gregory, she'd just come out of a rough patch, years of being a single mom, struggling to keep up with bills, dealing with loneliness, and worrying constantly about whether she was giving me enough. Gregory came into her life at a moment when she felt empty. He was charming, helpful, and knew exactly what to say. He never came on too strong. Instead, he slowly wrapped himself around our lives, doing little things that made her feel seen and supported. At first, it seemed harmless. But over time, she started to notice the manipulation. The way he'd sulk when she spent too much time with me. The comments about how hard it was to support someone else's kid. She said she stayed because she felt like she owed him for being there when things were bad. But this past week had reminded her of something important. She didn't owe anyone anything that came at the cost of her dignity or her daughter's safety. Then she told me something else. She had quietly started the process of selling the house. Not because she wanted to run away from the memories, but because she wanted a full restart. We'd moved to a smaller place. Something just ours. The next day, we started packing. Not everything, just a few boxes of things we knew we'd want with us. A week later, Gregory tried again. This time, he emailed her. He said he had spoken to a lawyer and wanted to reassess the division of assets. He claimed he had put years of work into their shared life and deserved some sort of compensation. But here's the thing, legally, he had no leg to stand on. Their marriage never involved joint ownership of property. Mom had protected her assets from the very start. She had a prenup he once laughed off, calling it a formality. Turns out that formality saved her everything. Her lawyer sent a formal reply. No assets were being divided. No spousal support. No right to the house, the car, or her accounts. And then, just like that, Gregory disappeared. No more texts. No more emails. He was gone. It's been a few months now. We moved into a 2-bedroom place closer to downtown. It's smaller, older, but it feels nice, warm. Mom's smiling more. She finally joined that yoga class she used to talk about but never had time for. I started working part-time at another bookstore near the campus I plan to attend next semester. Update 2. It had been almost 2 months since we moved into the new place, and life had slowly started to feel steady again. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was warm in the way that mattered. It had mismatched furniture and boxes we still hadn't fully unpacked, but it was filled with peace, laughter, and a lot of tea nights on the couch watching reruns of old shows we both liked. Mom seemed lighter. There was a kind of brightness in her that I hadn't seen in years. Not forced happiness, not putting on a brave face for me, but real, unfiltered joy. I knew she still carried some guilt over what had happened, but I also knew she was done letting Gregory's shadow linger in her life. We thought he would only appear when the cooling off period was over. We thought wrong. Gregory reappeared in the most ridiculous way possible. One Saturday morning, while I was helping Mom unload groceries from the car, we both froze at the sight of a black sedan pulling into the parking lot. It wasn't a flashy car, probably rented or borrowed, but we both knew who it was before he even stepped out. Gregory. He was wearing a cheap button-up, sleeves rolled, trying to play the casual card like we'd all just bump into each other like old friends. Mom told me to stay back and quietly handed me the keys so I could take the bags upstairs. I didn't go upstairs. I stood behind the corner wall of our building and listened. I wish I hadn't, but I couldn't help myself. I was worried about her safety, too. He started with a fake laugh. Said it was crazy running into her like this, even though it was clear he'd gone out of his way to find our new place. He claimed he just wanted to check in. Said he'd been doing some thinking and a lot of growing up over the past few weeks. He said he realized he made mistakes, that he was stressed when he kicked me out, and that he reacted poorly. Then he tried a line that made my stomach turn. He said that maybe now, with some space, we could all be a family again. Mom's voice stayed calm. She told him he needed to leave and not come back. She reminded him that they were legally separated and only waiting for it to finalize, and any further contact would be considered harassment. That's when his mask cracked again. He scoffed and said she had no idea what she was throwing away. That people like her didn't usually get second chances with men like him. He said she was old, jaded, and clinging to some fantasy life she was never going to have. Then, he said something I'll never forget. He told her that she should remember where she came from. That without him, she'd still be working double shifts at that call center, struggling to keep the lights on and begging for a loan from her relatives. That he'd been the one to elevate her. That's when she laughed. Not sarcastically. Not bitterly. Just a short, real laugh. Like someone finally heard a joke they'd been waiting for all their life. And then she told him the truth. She looked him dead in the eye and said that the only person who'd been receiving charity in the marriage was him. She told him about the trust fund her grandmother left her when she turned 30. How she'd used it to pay off her debts, buy the house in her name, and create the illusion of a comfortable, middle-class life while working part-time only to keep herself busy, not because she needed to. She said she'd let him believe he was contributing more than he was. That she'd covered up his repeated job losses, his failed investments, and the loans he secretly took out in hopes of flipping cryptocurrency. She said the only reason she never threw it in his face was because she wanted to maintain some form of respect between them. But since he had the nerve to claim she was beneath him, she figured the gloves were off. Gregory's face turned a deep shade of red. He tried to deny it at first. Said she was bluffing, that there was no way she had that kind of money. That if she did, he would have known. Mom said that's exactly why he didn't know. Because if she'd told him back then, he would have treated her worse than he already did, tried to drain her dry and make it look like he'd earned it. Then she told him one final thing. That the prenup protected everything, and there wasn't a single asset or penny he could touch. Gregory didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking like a man who just realized he'd bet his life on a scratch ticket and lost. When he finally did speak, all he said was that she'd regret this. That karma had a way of coming around. Then he got in the car and drove off. Mom didn't look back once. Later that night, she told me she'd debated telling him the truth for a long time. But when he showed up trying to play the victim, claiming she owed him something after everything he'd done, she realized it was the only way to close that chapter. We didn't talk about him again after that. Instead, we made dinner. Watched a terrible cooking competition show. Argued about whether or not pineapple belonged on pizza. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Security. Not just financial. Emotional. I wasn't a charity case. She wasn't either. We were a team. And now, we could finally live like it. Update 3, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was home alone since Mom had gone out to run errands. When I opened the door, I froze. There, standing with a weathered suitcase in one hand and sunglasses he hadn't bothered to take off indoors, was my biological father, Austin. I hadn't seen him in person since I was 16, and even back then, it was more of a handshake at a diner kind of visit than anything resembling real parenting. He'd moved abroad not long after the divorce, some corporate job in the Middle East, I think, and his presence in my life was kept alive mostly through inconsistent birthday cards and the occasional polite check-in with Mom. He looked older now, like life had finally caught up to him. But there was a steadiness in his expression that wasn't there before. I stood there, too stunned to speak, until he gently asked if my mom was home. She wasn't, but I let him in anyway. He didn't say much at first, just looked around, noticing the modest space, the unpacked boxes. Eventually, he sat at the kitchen table and sighed. Said he had only just found out what had happened about Gregory kicking me out, about Mom leaving, about everything. He'd heard it from an old friend of Mom's, someone who ran into him at the airport when he came back into town for a short visit. He hadn't even been planning to stay long, but apparently, that conversation changed his itinerary. He said that he knew he hadn't been around the way he should have. That he always assumed Mom had it handled because she was strong and stubborn and never wanted to ask for help. But he regretted letting that assumption keep him away for so long. And then, before I could say anything, the doorbell rang again. It was like the universe was on a timer. This time, it was Gregory. Of all the moments he could have chosen to try another grand re-entrance into our lives, he managed to pick the exact one when my biological father was sitting in our kitchen sipping lukewarm tea. I opened the door and immediately felt a wave of annoyance ripple up my spine. Gregory had that same self-important look again, the one that screamed he was here to reclaim what was rightfully his. He looked me over like I was a child throwing a tantrum, then gave some pitiful speech about how he and Mom needed to talk things through like adults. Before I could shut the door in his face, I heard Austin's voice from the kitchen, low but firm. He asked who it was. When I said it was Gregory, I expected him to sit quietly and let me handle it. But no. My father got up, walked right to the door beside me, and opened it wider so Gregory could see him standing there. Now that was a moment I'll never forget. Gregory blinked like he didn't recognize the man. Then his eyes narrowed. Austin kept his expression calm, but his tone had cooled into something razor sharp. He said he had just flown in and had heard about Gregory's little stunt kicking out a teenage girl while her mother was out of town, calling it not running a charity, and then trying to slither back when he realized he'd bitten the hand that fed him. Gregory scoffed, obviously rattled. He said it wasn't any of Austin's business. That this was a family matter between him and his wife. Austin smiled, but it wasn't a warm one. He told Gregory that this was very much his business. That I was his daughter, not his wife's problem. That while he had kept a respectful distance for years out of courtesy and trust, he had never signed off on a grown man thinking it was okay to put his child on the street over some ego trip. Gregory tried to pivot. Said that maybe things were miscommunicated, that he had just made a bad judgment call during a stressful week. But Austin didn't budge. He told Gregory flat out that any man who couldn't keep a roof over a young girl's head for even 1 week wasn't fit to claim authority in that household. That if it weren't for Mom's grace, Gregory would have been jobless and homeless years ago. Gregory's face turned a deep crimson, and for a second, I thought he was going to try to argue. Instead, he turned to me, maybe thinking I'd soften the blow, and said that maybe we were all overreacting, that he was just trying to help our blended family function better. Austin cut in sharply. He told Gregory not to insult our intelligence with that nonsense. And then came the final blow. Austin said that if Gregory came near our place again, he'd get a restraining order. He wasn't bluffing, he even pulled out a business card from his wallet. Apparently, he had a lawyer in town, and he was more than willing to get involved if necessary. Gregory stood there, stunned. This wasn't the version of my father he'd been expecting. Maybe he thought I didn't have anyone standing behind me. Maybe he assumed I was just some angry step kid trying to make trouble. But now he realized I wasn't alone. He turned around and walked off without another word. Once the door shut, Austin sighed, rubbed his face, that he hadn't meant to go full Liam Neeson, but someone had to say it. We both laughed. Not because it was funny, more because it felt like something had cracked open, letting the light back in. Mom came home about an hour later, her eyes widening the moment she saw Austin at the table. But after a brief pause, she smiled. They hugged, like two old friends. And just like that, the past collided with the present, but this time, it worked in our favor. That night, we all ate dinner together. Not as some happy family fantasy, but as three people who had finally understood where they stood. Gregory may have thought he was the man of the house. But he was just a visitor in a home that never truly belonged to him.